Hello and good afternoon. It is now noon. I am just going to get my guest today, Randy, on the phone. And we'll... Okay, trying this again. This beginning part is always really funny. Everybody gets to just, hey, Randy, you should see the invite now coming to you. Hey, Gemma, thanks for joining. Just getting Randy on the line. Okay, let me try again. It wouldn't be an IGTV live with me if there wasn't some sort of delay getting people on the phone. So today we have Randy Buckley, who is one of my favorite people and also a coach. Randy, it says for some reason you're unable to join, so I'm going to try again. Maybe you can try to request to join me from your side. And let's see if that works. Otherwise, I'll hang up and we'll try it again. There's always gremlins playing when I do my lives. So today we're going to be talking about how to have healthy boundaries. Randy is the guru at this, and I've taken her course several times.
Hi, did it work?
Yeah. See, this always happens. The IT gremlins is signature. If I'm going to do a live, there's IT gremlins that come and say, oh, we're just going to make it difficult before you start.
Of course. Yeah, but you know, you modeled handling it very well.
Thank you. So Randy, so good to see you. I know
Good to see you.
You've been in the forest, which I'm very jealous of, right?
Yeah.
Was that in Montana? Is that right?
It was in northern Minnesota.
Northern Minnesota. Okay.
Yeah, I live in California, but I do that every summer.
Okay. And where are you back in California now?
I'm back in California. Yeah.
Amazing. So for those of you who have just joined or will be joining, this is Randi Buckley. She's an amazing human. She's a boundaries coach, and she has studied everything under the sun for the last, I don't know how many years, but she's one of my gurus and people that I look up to. So thank you very much, Randy, for being here with me today to talk about boundaries and context, nuance, and discernment. I know these are your favorite terms and favorite things. So could you introduce yourself and a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. My journey, so you said I've studied a lot of just about everything under the sun, and it often feels like it. But I've been able to take a lot of those things and really put together an amalgam of philosophies and ideas and just what's worked for me and bring it out to other people. So I'm a coach, and I mentor up-and-coming coaches and train them in my Healthy Boundaries for Kind People methodology, and also work with clients around the world.
Yeah, I like how on your website you have from tricky to truth and icky to ease.
Yes. Yeah. I think you know, whenever we're trying to figure out what to do, it's usually whatever's true for us is. It's really easy to say, but I think that's such a great North Star, or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, the Southern Cross to follow. Use that as a compass. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love that. And that's one of the things that I really learned from you, and I talk about all the time now, is using those values as your guiding compass and always having to turn home to. Without that foundation, we really, we might go exploring, we might expand, but we might not be going in the right direction for us, for what's true to us.
Yeah.
And how
when it feels like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think we have a bit of a delay there.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so with all of this, I mean, you've been working in this area and you created this healthy boundaries methodology. What was the spark to have you go down and specifically focus on this area?
I never anticipated or expected to focus on boundaries per se. And a lot of times when I'm interviewed, people will expect a really amazing story how I overcame bad boundaries. But the truth of the matter is, I've always had pretty good boundaries. And that was juxtaposed for me when somebody very close to me in my family, who I also experienced having very good boundaries, was in a series of very volatile and abusive relationships. And I wasn't in the position to necessarily, or I wanted to say to this person, shake them by the shoulders and say, "What are you doing?" And
Yeah.
talk about all these things. But I would have alienated them in the process, and that was in a time when they really didn't need to have people who loved them alienate them. They needed their support. So it ended up being, and then I noticed a lot of it was coming up with my clients, and so I just started documenting some of the things I was saying, first through Facebook posts, like, I'd make notes during the session. And a lot of it was just the way I was raised. My dad was particularly good at that. And it just was something that, we can always refine, but also came very naturally to me. So when you ask how it came about, it really was a love letter to somebody that I couldn't say to them, but I was able to put it out in the world in another way, which they have since heard, and they are also in a very healthy relationship now.
Amazing.
Happy to say it.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. And it's, it's so important, I think, that point that you made of how we were raised, because a lot of times we're raised in environments that are chaotic, don't exhibit healthy boundaries or healthy relationships, or, healthy anything
Right.
sometimes. So we do coping mechanisms to protect ourselves. And, I love that your course is called Healthy Boundaries for Kind People, because I think a lot of people, I know you had us visualize, like close our eyes and visualize, what does the word boundary mean to us?
Right.
And most people, line in the sand, or
Right.
concrete wall, or, something like that. And so most people feel like they won't be nice people if they're exhibiting boundaries. So can you tell our listeners today a little bit more about this distinction between kind and nice? I think this is a really important point for a lot of people.
Sure. Thank you. I feel like I need to slip you a 20 for asking, because I love to talk about it. So let me just take a step back to preface it. I found that people who identify as kind or want to be kind, or that is aspirational, or it's just very much who they are, won't have boundaries, because to them, boundaries usually feel unkind, as you mentioned. So one of the first things we do is find out how boundaries are actually an act of kindness. And I think a lot of folks conflate being nice with being kind. And there's certainly, if you had a Venn diagram and you had the two, there's certainly be a lot of overlap. But I probably am not the nicest person in the world, but I am pretty kind. And by that, that means let me give you an example. I think kindness and niceness definitely have some overlap, as I said. But for me, niceness is about comfort. And I think it gets a bad rap, actually, because I'll hear people say, "I'm not a nice girl anymore." I think there can be a place for it. It can be manners. It can be there's civility. There's a place for it, but not when it trumps kindness. So for me, niceness is about helping other people feel comfortable, but kindness is much more bottom line of bottom line respect, justice, looking out for humanity and other people. And I will always take a stand for that over niceness, though they can go hand in hand. So I think it's really helpful to parse out what the difference is for us individually between nice and kind, if you identify as a kind person, and ask yourself, is what you're doing in order to be nice or appear nice, or if you find yourself in the trap of people pleasing, is that actually kind? Is it kind to you? Is it kind to other people? Is it actually, if that's a drop in the water, is that the ripple you want to have be the thing that ripples out or emanates from you?
Yeah.
So I hope that answered that. Okay.
And I think what you just said too is, if this action is, you're doing something for someone else to make them comfortable, but then it's kind towards yourself, then that's not kind overall, because in yoga they call it Ahimsa, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're, these are like negative thoughts and actions towards other people, but also including towards yourself, right? So something to make someone else's world comfortable, but then neglecting your own, that's also not kind.
Exactly. I think kindness is an equation, and it has to be balanced on both sides. So kindness is an equation. It must include you. And I'm not saying it's not kind if it doesn't, but it's a fully balanced equation if it includes your kindness going toward you and to what's important to you, and not necessarily supporting somebody in order to be nice or thinking you're kind with something that actually might be detrimental to them or detrimental to the world beyond them or to yourself. Yeah.
And I think, so many of us grow up, as going back to that earlier point, with parents that, one, they don't exhibit healthy boundaries, but then two, they're always telling us, oh, be nice to that person, or, oh, go give your aunt a hug, even though we may not want to give the aunt a hug, or that they instruct us to do things that from society's point of view, satisfies these social rules and norms so that we can. So of course it's well, but then that teaches us as well to violate our own boundaries because we're doing what we don't necessarily find to be true or that we're, but then we get used to this pattern of doing things for others even when we're not comfortable with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think as a parent myself, I think it's easy to slip into that because you want people to love your kids like you do. You want them to see how awesome they are. And then when they don't, you're like, ah. But or when your kids don't do something, but you're wanting that and you're wanting them to have that connection. But it's a violation of your own instinct, I think. And when we're teaching people to override their own instinct, even if they need some time to figure it out, we're teaching people to override their instinct. And I think instincts are almost like these natural dowsing rods or divining rods, I can't remember what it is right now, almost showing you where your boundaries need to be. And that's going to be different in different situations at different points in your life. But when we start to get in this habit of overriding our instincts in order to please others or not rock the boat, or, oh, they'll be disappointed in me if I don't hug that person, we're thinking we're a kid, or there will be hell to pay. I mean, that's also the case there. If you didn't do things, there could be a really bad situation afterwards. But so many of us have been conditioned, for better or for worse, into overriding those instincts. And I think in boundaries, it's really, really wonderful to allow yourself to say, what is my instinct and why? And sometimes it's comes from past traumatic experiences, so the instinct comes up. All of it, we're trying to protect ourselves. All of it, we're trying to have our own back in order to not get hurt. But sometimes those are really incredibly inelegant solutions or ways that make us feel gross afterward.
Yeah. And someone just asked, Kelly has asked us a question. How can spiritual bypassing come into kindness and be harmful to us?
First of all, hello, Kelly. I adore Kelly. So spiritual bypassing, as you know, in Healthy Boundaries for Kind People curriculum, we talk a lot about that because spiritual bypassing, which is its own story, Robert Masters wrote the book about it, but he didn't necessarily come up with the term, and suddenly I can't remember who did, but that's when we think, only good vibes. Or we just kind of wash away this whole thing without looking at the complexities that might actually be in there. And we're so, they were trying to do the right thing or something, and really just generalizing a whole thing away in order, and often I think we think we're taking the right path when we do that, or we're trying to be a better version of ourselves, but it often it steps over a lot of crap sometimes that actually needs attention. Maybe not, a ton of attention, but it does need some sort of attention to, look at that, work through it, whatever that is. So spiritual bypassing, or being a good person. That Kelly just read that. That's very common. I want to be a good person, so I didn't bring it up. I want to be a good person, and there's certainly discernment that can come in, and that's what I want to come in. Discern: is this being a good person? As opposed to that autopilot of, oh, this is what I must do.
Yes, I think this autopilot of the shoulds as well. Like I'm now on this path, or I've done, this, whether you're a yoga teacher or a coach or a healer of some kind in this world, right? You want to be a good and fair person.
Absolutely.
We judge what other people do because they don't match what we're now doing, And then this is actually what creates these emotions, right? These negative secondary emotions in with us. And then we just kind of start getting in this really sticky soup, this place where it's really hard to kind of navigate, because we're thinking we should do something. So then we do it, even though we may not want to. But that's what good people do. That's what kind people do. And kind of internal war raging because we're not in alignment anymore. And then we have secondary emotions of guilt or shame or, disappointment.
Resentment.
Yeah, resentment. I think that's the one that I remember very clearly from the course where it's somebody's birthday and you're in a sticky financial position, right? You don't have necessarily a lot of cash flow at the moment. And so you go and buy them a present that you shouldn't really, be spending that much money on something. And when it comes to your birthday, they don't get you anything and you get really resentful. Or you're stressed for that next month because, you've spent over your budget. None of those things are kind to, yes, you bought them a present, but it's coming with all of this energy attached to it that eventually relationship.
Right. I don't think it's a huge gift to another person to go into debt on their behalf to feel like you're giving something. I would feel really sad if somebody felt like that's what they needed to do for me, is to go into debt in order to give me a present, in that birthday context. There are certainly other ways we can express ourselves, but that's what I mean by kindness. Kindness has to go all the ways. We're trying to do something kind, but it's also kind to us in return, or in addition, for that to be balanced. So, yes, a lot of this is done in the name of being a good person. And then I feel like the thinking around boundaries is so binary. Well, you tried to do this, you aren't a good person because you did spiritual bypassing. Shame on you. We're all, with a little exception, we're all doing the best we can. So let's just, pick it up from here and try to figure it out, as opposed to berating ourselves and having shame that we didn't get it right.
Yeah. I think adopting a lens of curiosity and compassion really makes it, because as soon as you adopt that curious lens, then look at the situation from a different point of view. And it's, of course, where we have an ego, we live in this, we feel separate from other people, but it's always why me, I. But as soon as we can get out of that and be curious, maybe what's going on in their life, maybe someone at work, for example, is really very diligent, and then all of a sudden they start dropping the ball. So, maybe they start getting in trouble. But instead of just going on the attack, what's wrong with you? You made this huge mistake, and maybe just treating them like a human being and asking what's going on in their world would then allow you to cover that they're going through something really major in their life. And that's the reason behind.
I love how you said that. Really, curiosity as a tool of compassion, as opposed to just saying this is the situation, and bringing our own story to it, but actually using curiosity as a tool of compassion. Say, I wonder what's up, and if it's the right situation to broach that with them, or just hold that curiosity as they're going through that, to say, wonder what's going on. Wonder how I could support.
Of course, some people's boundaries, they may not be comfortable to talk to you about what's going on. And so I think that's another important thing to remember, that we may have a boundary that allows people to ask us personal questions, but the other boundary may not allow that, or they may not be comfortable. We shouldn't assume anything. But, you can just simply say, I'm here, I don't know if something's going on, but I'm here if you'd like to talk, and just let that you're there to hold that space, and you're there to listen should they need it. And then when they're ready, they can come around. And, I think even just the awareness that something is off really makes a big difference. People feel seen, rather than, just being invisible, and, you don't have your radars completely blind and they're, slipped under it. I think as a employee, that makes a huge difference if their boss notices these small, minute changes and is curious and passionate at that, instead of just oblivious.
And as somebody who's been the person who's slipped up, we're pretty much our worst enemies when it comes to that, or we're hypercritical of ourselves. So when somebody else is coming at you from a place of curiosity, I mean, or kind curiosity, or kindness, or anything that's not, feeling really aggressive, it's a soft landing, and it really helps open people up. Or if nothing else, it's an act of kindness that they were not giving themselves. And we're always, maybe not always, but for most of us, we're super duper hard on ourselves more than other people ever would be. So the fact that somebody else isn't coming along berating us for the same thing we already have under control with our berating, it's a gift. It's really, I think, kindness has been oxygen to me before in places where I felt like I was suffocating. And that person just checking in has been everything. Yeah. Very well.
It makes such a difference. And, sometimes it doesn't even have to be words spoken, right? I've talked to a lot of people lately about how, nonverbal communication is so powerful. It actually makes up the majority of our communication, right? And movement. But even just making eye contact with someone, those little micro movements of the eyebrows, or just reaching out your hand and holding their hand. They don't have any small makes such a difference to people. And I know what you mean about, you said, use the analogy of the oxygen. Some people, and I know for myself, when I've been in these situations, when I felt like I was just drowning under all of this weight, happened, it was like this life raft that all of a sudden I could just stop kicking and treading water, even though I probably didn't need to, but I wasn't aware yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Times people drown in like the most shallow part of water because they're just so panicked. But realizing someone is there to help calm them down, then they can, realize that they can stand up, or they can, just take a few steps, and then, they're out of the current, whatever it is. But I think that's really important.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah.
I love how you use the wave analogies that's why we connected in the beginning as well, just because the way you use the language is very powerful with the imagery. And I use oceans, because also emotion is like a wave, right? Emotion, I did this yesterday. I had a workshop on embracing the human experience. And so we were talking emotions, but also, what emotions are we uncomfortable to sit with? Like fear, anger, and guilt, and shame, all of these. And then someone brought up, well, I'm actually uncomfortable with love or with closeness, and so we judge these emotions as good or bad. But at the end of the day, they're just energy, and we allow ourselves to experience that full wave. And so then what happens, pressure builds up and builds up and builds up. And then all of a sudden, like, a pressure system over the water, then we get this huge storm, we get a tornado or a tsunami, and it's just out of control. Whereas if we allowed ourselves to feel these things instead of suppressing, we'd actually be able to get through them with less charge, every time they start to occur.
I am a really big believer that emotions aren't good or bad. We certainly might have some preferred emotions and feelings. We might have some preferred ones. But ultimately, they're messengers. They're information about what's going on, what isn't sitting right with us, what might need work, or just that something's off. And by not looking at that, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. Sometimes it's way too much. Sometimes you need, I love the term soft place to land, whether that's with another person or you need to be in the right space. But, I'm a big believer in metabolizing those emotions, or there's emotional constipation, and we know constipation does. So, yeah, it definitely builds up. I'm not beyond potty humor.
Because a lot of people, what they do is they then, they think they're being kind, they're trying to be nice to everyone. So then the coping is the people pleasing, right? So some experience, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge traumatic experience, but it could be where, your parents worked all the time. And so they were tired when they were dismissive of you. And so then you you went and became a people pleaser to keep the peace and make sure everyone was happy, or you go
Mm-hmm.
the other rebel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'll show you I don't need you,
Mm-hmm.
or draw. And I think we all do some of those to some extent, but like I was definitely a
Yeah.
people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure everybody was happy. And this is
It's
then
very
what,
diplomatic too, right? I mean,
yeah,
it allows you to feel some sense of control. Like if I can make sure everybody's happy, the boat will be a little more calm. It won't rock as much. But people pleasers, I think, by and large, get their self worth by what they can do for other people, and
yes,
derive that self worth by what we can do. So if you constantly feel that you're doing things for other people, then that makes you feel good and or worthy, and that needs to be looked at. And sometimes that's absolutely the case. But if it's the only place you're deriving your self worth from, that's when it gets a little tricky.
yeah. And that's something,
Yeah.
that I went on with you. And in the last few years, I've really
Mm-hmm.
seen how I was using that. And that external validation was something that I was constantly seeking.
Mm-hmm.
And shifting into a place of my own self worth and standing firm in that really made such a huge difference,
Right.
because I used to try and take responsibility for other people's emotions. And that
Yes. Yeah. Oh
so
yeah.
when you're there and somebody, let's say you finally express what's going on for you, and then they get upset about it, right? Because they're not happy
Mm-hmm.
that their world is now messed up, of course, because we're humans, right? We don't like change.
Sure. Yeah.
What I would often do is in an argument or something, not so much at work, but in personal relationships for sure. If
Mm-hmm.
there was um, some kind of pushback or
Mm-hmm.
a negative emotion that was exhibited toward to me because of it,
Yeah.
backtrack and find ways to kind of like try and massage the situation. And, oh, that's
Mm-hmm.
not really, I meant it more like this, like don't be upset,
Mm-hmm.
especially managing older people. Sometimes, you have to deal with sensitive personalities and things like that, right? And maybe the way they perceive something also was not how you intended. But then in
Sure.
the end, to appease them, you completely just like walk all over yourself, right?
Right. Right.
But I
Mm-hmm.
was 5 years back. And so that's why I think it's so important that people become aware that they're addicted to people pleasing, and then they
Mm-hmm.
people pleasing addiction.
It's definitely worth checking out and looking into to see. And there's nothing wrong. I think in the line of work we're in, people can really be quick to vilify. Oh, you want external validation? Chill, come for yourself. You know what? I like external validation. That's fine. That's okay. But it's when it's the only source of determining our self worth, or if we're placing way too much importance on it, or it has too much weight. But yes, it's definitely worth checking out. That people pleasing is, and for some people, they find it was a tool of survival. Having worked with a lot of children of folks who had addiction to alcohol. They didn't know what parent they were coming home to, so it was, sometimes it was the happy drunk or the mean drunk. It could have gone any way, but if they were people pleasing, they felt like they're always one step ahead,
Yeah,
and they wouldn't have somebody's wrath. And there's so many situations. But what you mentioned about pushback, I also think is very much worth mentioning, because so often, whether it's in people pleasing or boundaries and the very close relationship between those, we if boundaries are challenging, or if you're a people pleaser, we view pushback as like, oh, it means it won't happen. It means I
yeah,
can't have this boundary. See, can't have boundaries, or I'm stuck doing this because other people didn't like it. But for me, pushback is part of the process. And I think
yeah,
if we can start to see pushback as opposed to, stop sign, but the fact you've been heard, and sometimes that is progress in and of itself. But so I really think if we can look at pushback and recognize that it is part of the process of boundaries, or breaking people pleasing, or just really shifting the relationship that you have with somebody, it means they heard it and they're not quite sure where things are anymore. And
yeah,
that uncertainty, I think, leads people to be very concerned, or initially to be a little bit assertive or hyper assertive, and or aggressive in that.
yeah,
But once they usually find out what you mean, or if it's changing. Can I go on a little riff here? Is
yeah,
that okay? Okay,
yeah,
so boundaries often to me feel like a puzzle. And each puzzle piece, is identified by its own boundaries. And when those boundaries start to change shape, the puzzle doesn't fit together like it used to.
Right.
And for the people in our life, they're like, what's going on here? And sometimes they might not say anything if they're also a people pleaser, silently having resentment, or some people totally get it, and some people are freaked out because they don't know how they fit into your life anymore. Their shape of the puzzle changed.
Yeah.
So they don't know how they fit in. In time, people come to, as you help them see if they still fit in your life, help them see what that looks like and how you're engaging with them now, that anxiety goes down a lot. And, we don't have to have people to like our boundaries. And I think that often people think they have to like your boundaries in order to have them. We only need people to honor the boundaries.
Yeah.
And as the shape of those pieces fit together and they start to see that, oh, I still can be here, great, and not everybody will, and that's okay. There's a lot. It's easier for everybody, but that's why pushback's part of the process. That's part of the crap. I don't fit with this anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just something. Like you say, it's like a muscle. The
Yep.
first time you go to the gym and you do some push-ups, the next day you can't put your hair in a ponytail or put your arms, and you haven't
Yeah.
used those for a long time, and your pecs are sore.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything above your head is really, really hard. Um, and I think people forget that, and they
Yep.
hope. Of course, we hope that it will be smooth and painless, but that's also a sign of growth. And I like what you said, is that pushback is a good sign because it's also showing that people have heard you, they're listening. Maybe they just
Mm-hmm.
don't yet, but a lot of that probably also has to do with how you articulated those boundaries. Because I know for myself, when I started to realize that I didn't have any, or the ones that I had were, like sometimes I'd follow them and sometimes I wouldn't. I don't know if you can hear that, but somebody's just started doing some construction. This is life at
No
home.
worries.
Um, and then I realized, well, it's not very clear to the other person because this is not what they're used to. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm sometimes not even following my own rules, my own boundaries. So how can I expect them to know, right? Or I would be very much like, this is my boundary, do it or leave. It was like, military style. Here's your new order. If you don't follow this directive, then, goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
So finding your own voice and finding your
Mm-hmm.
own ability to communicate with kindness, but also be, affirmative. You don't have to be military sergeant, but you also don't want to just, oh, so I'd really appreciate if you did this sometimes for me, and
Mm-hmm.
then people won't respect it either, right?
Yes. One of the things I find, and it's one of the tough questions we ask in the beginning to help you boundaries for kind people, which you are a certified coach of, by the way. I don't know if I have mentioned that enough. A very good coach.
Very sad.
Yeah, I'm super stoked that you represent the word. But, often people don't honor our boundaries because they don't know we have any.
Mm,
Because we think this should be a boundary, everybody should know, but it might be new. Or we feel we've said it several times, but sometimes it just looks. But if people don't see you actually honoring your own boundary, it doesn't look like you have any. So as soon as we just say, you know what, I'll just do it myself, or whatever the situation is, it really doesn't look like we had that boundary anyway, or we weren't really serious. So
yes.
why would they? Why would they do that? And if anything, it's confusing. But to your point, often how we communicate that boundary also determines on if somebody heard it. Sometimes and there are cases where we are very firm, and we have to be very firm. It depends on what the issue is. And but people are far more likely to honor the boundary if they have heard it and they understand what that means. Again, they don't have to like it, and so often we wait for their approval, almost like trying to build consensus into what our own boundaries should be.
Yeah.
But the communication, it doesn't have to be. Um, I usually see one of two things. when people are challenged by boundaries, they're way too soft in communicating that boundary if they communicate it at all. And people are just kind of confused or don't know what's going on, or they really want to be understood. So they're so firm about it that people are too scared and or don't want anything to do with them. So there might be a place for some of those things, but usually trying to communicate in a way that they're going to understand and recognizing what wants to be seen in them or what wants to be acknowledged in them. That's actually the key.
Yeah, I like that too.
Taking
Recognize
that part of them.
what also need, because I think some work, we're so engrossed in our own journey. And, a big part of it is connection, right? And if we're not
absolutely.
connecting to others, if we're not aware of what their boundaries are, then, of course, work can only go so far. And, we might be doing all this massive work and excavating and digging deep and, looking, all of this stuff within ourselves, but that doesn't mean other people see that at the same level to detail that you do, right?
Absolutely.
We're like way down the core. But other people are looking at that surface level and they see some changes there, but they don't know all the other stuff unless you share that with them. And you make it relatable, right? Because if I go into JP Morgan and I start talking about boundaries, but I start talking about boundaries in a way that, they're going to look at me like, who's this cuckoo from the forest? And, why is she here? Right? But if I come in relating it to how those boundaries are going to help them be more efficient at work, how they're going to be able to have better discussions with their clients, with their boss, and then be able to actually shut off because they've gotten their work done. And then, for an hour, and that's a boundary they need to reset so that they can then, finish when US comes online. All of a sudden, oh, yes, I need these things, right? Go in and say, I need you to sit cross-legged and meditate and like hold everybody's hands and sing Kumbaya. They'll be like, right, get out.
Right. Knowing your audience is really good. And then the context for which those, what boundaries are you're speaking to. But also when I say trying to see what wants to be acknowledged in somebody is, you just nailed it. It's really speaking to their needs. And so if you can relate it in a way that does speak to what those needs are or what wants to be acknowledged in them, what's important to them, and then also in a way that helps them understand how things have changed, that makes a huge difference. And people may not get it right away, and that's okay. Just like pushback, they might need to hear it a couple different times. And that doesn't mean you just go on and on forever about it. You might have a bottom line, which I absolutely encourage. But people understand things in different ways over time. Yeah.
And I think that you have an exercise worksheet called Needless that we did in your course. Yeah.
That's right. That's actually something I got permission to use from Thomas Leonard's coaching. Yes.
Yeah. This worksheet where you basically go through kind of like when you do your values, like what's important to you, but there's the kind of headers and subheaders, and you down to 4, but those things change over time. Like maybe even from the time that I did it to the end of the course, they were very, very different because I did work and then I realized that some of those needs then got met. So then, and I think that's another thing with boundaries is people are not looking at them as something that's fluid or that's always like that's living, that's dynamic, and that will change based on the season, based on, for women, your monthly cycle. I mean, men have a cycle as well, but is, what stage of life are you in? Are you 20 years old or are you 40 years old? Those are very different stages, and you will have to set those points.
One of the modules in Healthy Boundaries for Kind People, because I like to use a lot of analogies, and one of them is boundaries are like a river. Meaning you never step into the same river twice. Everything is always flowing, and even if it's just 2 hours later, circumstances may have changed that you need a different boundary or different needs than you had 2 hours ago. And that, to your point, that absolutely is influenced by stage of life, what's going on in your life. But those boundaries it can be flexible. Another module I have is called Boundaries Are Like a Spine. They need to be able to bend and flex to support you. And people often have whiplash when I say that because we think boundaries are this very firm thing. And some of them might be. But if, to the point where a boundary can't flex to meet your needs, it becomes a cage. Just like a bridge is built to be able to sway a little bit, a building is built. Here in Hong Kong, there are lots of very tall buildings. They're going to move a little bit with how the earth moves. Otherwise, it would be really catastrophic. So some of our boundaries need to be designed in a way that they meet our needs, or engineered in a way to get our needs met, as opposed to what you said earlier, this line in the sand, that it's very binary thinking. And that very rarely serves.
Yeah, and I like what you just said about engineered to get the needs met, because in that, it then had steps to, okay, these are your needs, you've identified them. How do we get them met? And what is your support system? And how do you make sure other people know that you need these things so that you can, like, what do you design in your life? And I'm always talking to people about, micro habits, but also life systems. You important to have consistent habits that you do every single day, right? 1%, 37x by the end of the year, but system that you have around you to help support that change. And how, because I have a tendency to fall into workaholic tendencies, because I love what I do, especially now. Before it was escapism, now it's just one more thing, and then one more thing is like and and then I don't get no sleep or what have you. So I've now asked my partner, hey, I want you at this time to give me a 10-minute warning, and then after that 10-minute warning, you just come and shut my laptop. And like this is that, now it's time for dinner, or now it's time for us to have our time. Take, even if I have something else to do, take that break, because likely during the day I didn't take one, right? But this will help me. And I said I have to have the 10-minute warning first, because if you just like saunter over and slam the laptop shut, I might not be tapped.
Pointing out that boundaries are not one size fits all. Some people that would not work for, but if it works for you, that's great.
Exactly, but and then this is I'm communicating, hey, I need a little bit of help to make sure that I give myself this space and this time so that I can reset. Because I love this stuff, and I love to learn. So then I'm like sitting there, and next thing you know, I'm like this at the screen, like just eyes are high, but what works for you, and then communicating that to other people so they can help support you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that you you two have that understanding.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I think finding this communication, like, you make it fun. I did this workshop for parents, and it was like for moms, and how to manage their energy, and then how to say you're with your kids or your spouse, and you're getting into the kind of like demon dialogue of not seeing each other, not hearing each other, but maybe saying the same thing, and just saying silly like pineapple, and then everybody has to stop talking. And then, people are like, they giggle, right? It's like, it's such a weird word. I'm like, well, you can make it anything. You can make it alligator, you can make it spoon, just word. And it causes everybody to just stop. And then you can drop back into the space instead of whatever story is going on in your head. Because most of that, it's a story, right? And that's with the boundaries, because we have this story of what will happen if we.
Yes, there's a lot of narrative around. I call them the roots of the pathology of crappy boundaries. Really, the roots of our boundary challenges, and the stories usually go back to things like disappointing others, feeling unworthy, fear of missing out. And there's several more. Never having seen boundaries modeled. FOMO and JOMO. I saw you did something like that for sure. It's that story, but I love how that's an anchoring technique that you're using to really be cognizant and aware of, okay, what am I thinking about now? Is that the story is that true? Is it going to serve right now? And what would actually be something that would serve better?
Yes. thing. You know,
without
it's all
bypassing. I want
exactly.
to, yeah.
We can't just go and slap a band-aid. And yesterday, Sonia, who I did this workshop with, she
Hmm.
basically circle, and then she took like a little piece, and it looks like, somebody had just bitten the cookie, right? And there's a piece missing. And
Sure.
so when something happens and there's this
Hmm.
piece, then we try to cover it with something so that we
Hmm.
have appearance of the whole circle again.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
that's why we get attachments to things, and
Mm.
then so
Hmm.
attachment that hole's exposed, and we're not comfortable with looking at that hole, so we then try to cover it up again. Whereas if we actually just experienced our emotions and got out of our minds and got back into our bodies, we could then bring that piece back to us without having to have it externally given to us by something. And I thought that was
Mm.
a way of looking at it. Uh,
Hmm.
I especially like the cookie. It made me think about the Cookie Monster.
There you go. Yeah.
And so,
Mm.
Randy, changed the Healthy Boundaries course a little bit because you have an online, like an app that's launching soon. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, the app is very much in development, and that'll be independent of the course, but or it could be a support for people who want to do that. But the course is where we have changed it. We've changed the duration of that, and I'm actually really excited about what this looks like. And we're bringing some of our Healthy Boundaries coaches who are certified coaches. We start another new round of certification next week. So we're bringing them into some of you in to support people with that work as well. So it's I don't know how much you want me to say about it, but it is there are 12 different modules, and we now do that work over 6 months. So it's not just my boundaries work is a little different than what else I've seen for a lot of people, and it's because in part we go really deep.
Yeah.
Not It's not just a script of how to say no, 15 different ways to say no, but we really look at the core reason we have challenges with boundaries, and it's just an onion. There's so many layers, but we can to get to a point of a lot more awareness, confidence, and ease, and that's where we try to go in the course. Um, I just love it, to be honest. So, but we do a lot of we do group coaching and have open office hours. We work with Circle. That's what's new this year for our community platform, and then we make sure you have 6 months, so you're not just learning this and then dependent on me or other coaches to get through things, but you actually learn the skills for life
Yeah.
and to navigate, like we said, that river's never the same. So the skills and tools you will need, and really the philosophies and ways of thinking about boundaries will help you wherever you are on that river. So it's not necessarily you're dependent on who has the boat, but that you can navigate it on your own.
Yeah, I love that. It's I took the course in 2019, I
That sounds
think.
right. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really enjoyed the fact that it was 6 months because while it seems like a long commitment,
Mm-hmm.
it was definitely difficult at some points where it was like
Mm-hmm.
I would have just been overwhelmed if it was any quicker because of how deep it goes. But it
Mm-hmm.
like really forces you to look at some things, and then
Yeah.
it's that analogy of teaching a man to fish versus giving the fish, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
then I did actually did a round two of the same course, and then I did the
Mm-hmm.
facility course. And I'm also
Yes.
going to get for round two of that just to really
Mm-hmm.
deepen the learning.
Yeah.
Um, but that has made such a difference in my life, and then that's also why it's part of my new course as well, because
Mm-hmm.
the boundary work was probably the biggest catalyst and support system for my growth and learning over the last 3-4 years. As I've been on
Mm-hmm.
the peeling back those layers and healing and
Mm-hmm.
facing myself in the mirror. I think that's really one of the biggest
Yeah.
things. A lot of coaching programs are hard for some people because that's what a good coach does is they hold up that mirror that you might not have been looking in for a really long time.
Right.
Only way that you can shift the energy around this stuff.
Yeah. And I feel like boundaries are often feel tangential to everything else we have going on in our life, or this thing I need to work on. For me, they are the container.
Yeah.
They are the conditions we need for to have the relationships that we want. and they are the container for everything else. So for me, it's not this thing on the side that actually is more the vehicle for how we traverse our relationships and move forward or whatever direction we move in life.
Exactly. Yeah, because it doesn't necessarily, I mean, forward is subjective, right? Most people think of, we have to be going up, but forward could be going to the side. It could even be going back the other direction, but in a slightly, right, not on that same exact path, but just somewhere else. And that's why pivoting, because it doesn't always have to be that, step by step up the ladder, as Heather calls it, being a corporate escapee, your own path. And
We
then,
love our Heather Torkelson.
yeah, she's I think one of these days we can all meet on her polar expedition. That would be awesome.
Yes, yes. Heather and I spoke at the same conference in Norway together, so it was super fun because we've been friends for about a decade now, and so that was really fun.
Yes. Maybe in 10 years, whatever platform, because IG may not be around and then at that point, in 10 years, whatever have that we'll be doing some other catch-up interview and talking about, where these rivers have taken us.
That would be very cool.
So Randy, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your Healthy Boundaries for Kind People program? What's the best?
Sure. So my website's probably the best. It's my name, Randy with an I, Buckley.com. And, if something was interesting here, you see me tagged, that'll eventually lead you to the website. But I also want to make sure that it's very clear that I fully endorse the Healthy Boundaries for Kind People work that you do. And you do a very nice job of it. So they can also get in touch with you.
Thank you very much. No, I'm excited next round to get started and see some of the new faces in there and, go dive. And I've been reviewing the Bio-Mimicry content recently because that more so resonates now, looking to nature for solutions. And yeah, I feel like every time I look at it, I get something new because, I'm at a different point in life,
Exactly.
And then I come back and even though it's something that I've seen before, I get something new from it. So it's amazing like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, I will make sure to put your website and also, of course, tag you when I post this video up for everybody to watch later. And then if you guys have any questions, there's also a Facebook group that you have, right? Where you do some kind of daily posts and just words of wisdom for everyone. So I'll make sure that.
Yeah, thanks. You're daily. So.
Yeah.
Cool.
Perfect.
Amazing. I have to say hi to Lauren because my good friend Lauren is here. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining, everybody. We really appreciate you taking the time today. And if there were any questions that we didn't answer for you, just when we post the video, put them in the comments, and then we'll make sure to get back to you.
That would be awesome. And thank you for being here. And thank you so much for having me, Sarah. What a treat.
Thank you, Randy. I really appreciate your time and the time. Pleasure. I look forward to seeing you very soon.
I know. I can't wait. Cool. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.